So I tend to do a lot of video game lists on this channel where I really just go over games that I've personally been playing for the Steam Deck, or games that I feel like I can recommend, or games that I've just tested, that fit a particular criteria, like maybe they were older games or AAA games or whatever it is. But one of the favorite things that I love about doing those videos is that you tend to give me a ton of different suggestions in the comments section, and over time I've accumulated this great list of amazing titles that I've either never played before, or at least never played on the Steam Deck before. So that's what today's video is all about. I just keep a gigantic list of all of the games that you've recommended to me, and today I'm just going to go through about 5 of them. I couldn't do all of them obviously because there's just an absolute ton, and I hope there's a ton more because that gives me a lot to choose from for videos moving forward. But yeah, for now let's just go ahead and get started with the first one, which was recommended to me by Conargle, which I hope I'm saying that right and not butchering that, and that is Deep Rock Galactic. Now, Deep Rock Galactic sees you stepping into the role of a space dwarf who, along with 3 other space dwarves, is tasked with harvesting resources from deep within a planet and, basically mining things, as dwarves are wont to do. Of course, if you don't have friends to play with, you can always play solo and be provided a support robot that can take basic orders to mine and defend you as you descend deeper into the mines, which is helpful if you feel like lone wolfing it. But if you do decide to roll with a crew, there are 4 different classes, including Engineer, Gunner, Driller, and Scout, each with their own advantages for ensuring that a bug-infested mining operation goes smoothly. Now, at first I thought this would be kind of a simplistic sort of game just based purely on the presentation alone, but after I dug a little bit deeper, no pun intended, it actually does turn out that there is a whole lot more for this right beneath the surface. I keep making mining puns. But yeah, suffice it to say, there's a whole lot going on in Deep Rock Galactic, and I'm kind of kicking myself for never having checked this out previously. Balancing the tug-of-war between delving deeper into the mine to grab resources against the supplies that you have and threats that you might face seems like it can get pretty addictive. Now granted, if you're not doing well in the mines and the bugs seem like they get the upper hand every now and then, thankfully you do have the ability to mine health from resources that you can find while you're in there. And if you're low on munitions or gadgetry, you can always call in a supply drop, provided you have the resources to pay for it. The only real downside, I guess, that I've seen, specifically playing it on the Steam Deck so far, is that the text is really small, but Steam actually lets you know this before you fire up the game and prompts you to use the Steam button shortcut that actually enlarges the text temporarily. Although I would imagine that once you really get a feel for it, there might be some text that you really don't need to zoom in on that much, but I, as a new player, had to zoom in quite a bit to get an idea of what was going on and how the mechanics worked for Deep Rock Galactic. But between the tight controls and cartoony graphics and really just a satisfying game loop, this is a game that I could see myself returning to a lot. I'm not sure if I'll do it on Steam Deck though, and the only reason I say that is because my dad actually has this game on Xbox and had been meaning to try it out, and we were going to kind of check it out together. He does not have a Steam Deck yet, so we'll probably play it mostly on Xbox, but again, the idea of just playing it on the deck and, squeezing in a couple of runs before bed seems like fun, and it really plays well on the deck. So again, Conargle, thank you so much for the recommendation, I appreciate it, and I'm also, again, sorry if I've butchered your name. Next up is a game called Gato Roboto, where you play as a cat, and it is a Metroidvania. So my friend Maro actually recommended this to me, I think in the comments section on one of the recent videos, but she knew I love Metroidvanias, and on top of that, considering I've already done 2 cat-themed videos about the Steam Deck lately, she couldn't believe that this didn't make the list for other cat games you could play on the Steam Deck. But here's the thing, you just don't know what you don't know, right? I know about it now, and I have to say, after going ahead and taking the leap and purchasing Gato Roboto, it's pretty great, and it shows a whole lot of promise. The premise is that you're a cat named Kiki who belongs to a spaceship captain named Gary. Now unfortunately, while en route to investigate a distress signal from an alien planet, you end up crash landing, Gary is trapped inside, you are trapped on the outside, and it's up to you to go ahead and find a mech suit and 1, discover what's going on this planet, and 2, hopefully rescue your owner, Gary. It's kind of an adorable setup. And I would say the first thing that really jumped out to me about this one, aside from just the staunchly monochromatic presentation, adorable beep speak, and really just a charming presence overall, is just how tight the controls feel here. It definitely feels like it leans more towards the Metroid half of the Metroidvania genre, and in no time you'll be piloting your mech suit, unlocking rockets, health upgrades, exploring and unlocking a 2D map, and just generally having yourself a fun little space adventure as a cat named Kiki. And aside from the obvious gameplay mechanics you would expect from a Metroidvania, like exploration and unlocking abilities, and then backtracking to, access previously inaccessible areas, there were a couple of really neat quality of life enhancements that I really appreciated here. The first is that it shows an on-screen clock so you can keep track of how long you've been at it, but the bigger addition I really like is a simple XY coordinate system that's on screen at all times to let you know exactly where you're at in the map for quick recall. That is such a brilliant idea, and I don't think I've seen it in any of the Metroidvanias I've played before, but I just really like the idea that if you needed to leave the room you're in and go someplace that's 2 or 3 rooms over, or someplace that's not too far off the beaten path, that you could quickly have a mental note of exactly where you were in that grid system to get back to the location you needed to return to. And that's especially nice here because despite the fact that it is a charming, adorable little game in Gato Roboto, it also puts up a pretty stiff challenge. I'm not ashamed to say that the first boss that I encountered definitely gave me some trouble for at least 4 or 5 tries before I really got those patterns down. And to top it all off, something else that I find really appealing about Gato Roboto is the fact that it's not a very long game, and you can beat it in about 3 or 4 hours depending on how much of a completionist you are. And I think that's really nice considering that some Metroidvanias can be anywhere from like 10 to 30 or 40 hours depending on how difficult it is. So Mario, if you're watching, thank you again for another sound recommendation, and I promise I won't sacrifice you to any more ghosts and phasmophobia. Probably. Next up is an early access game called Gunlocked, which was recommended to me by Metal Mario 298, who did so ostensibly because I love Vampire Survivors so much. Like, a lot. Like, I've talked about that game on at least 5 or 6 videos I think so far. You should definitely play Vampire Survivors. But let's go ahead and talk about Gunlocked. Because in Gunlocked, rather than mowing down legions of undead in this top-down Castlevania-esque affair, rather it has you taking to the stars and bills itself as a twin-stick shooter, albeit without the twin stick. In each run, you'll move your ship around the map, dealing with a range of different incoming threats, and also unlocking new weapons and upgrades to take down incoming alien ships over and over again. You'll have mid-level bosses to contend with, and a constant stream of upgrade choices to make, which itself creates a sort of interesting mini-game where you're just constantly weighing the risk-reward of one upgrade versus another. Maybe you want to choose a tactical upgrade that pulls in resources from a further distance, or increase the number of targets you can lock onto with each radar sweep. The possibilities feel pretty endless, and like any good roguelike, each successive run feels different than the one before, which makes it very likely you'll return again and again to jump back into the fray for just one more run. And again, like Vampire Survivors, this is also an early access game, but it definitely feels tighter and more put together somehow. Now, I've only done a few runs so far, and I'm still coming to grips with the various augments, utilities, and weapons available on each run, but it shows undeniable promise, and I have a sneaking suspicion that much like Vampire Survivors before, this game's absolutely going to get its claws in me and just not let go. Plus, it's not overly expensive at I think $3.99, so again, Metal Mario 298, thank you so much for the recommendation because I'm having a blast with this one. And speaking of recommendations that were based on my pre-existing love for a particular game or type of game, is Quake Remastered, which was recommended by Jared. And the weird thing is, it didn't even occur to me to seek out Quake on the Steam Deck, despite the fact that I grew up playing a ton of it on the PC. If you're a fan of games like Doom or modern boomer shooters that I've mentioned on the channel before, like Dusk or Nightmare Reaper, or if you're somebody like me who just sort of grew up in those early days of the FPS genre, Quake is still super fun today. Using polygonal characters instead of sprites, it's a dark and moody affair, and I mean, yeah, technically any gory FPS game is going to feel a little dark thematically, but from a presentation standpoint, Quake is just a really atmospheric take on the first-person shooter, and it only gets amped up further by an absolute stellar soundtrack from Trent Reznor. It's not quite the pulse-pounding, adrenaline-fueled kind of soundtrack you would get from something like Doom, but it definitely establishes an ambiance that I think sets it apart from other shooters that came out around that same time period. But an area where it's definitely similar is the raw fun factor. You will still have a range of amazing weapons to work with, including the nail gun, which is super fun to use. It's a very fast, frenetic game, and I would say it leans a little bit more into the search portion of the search and destroy mechanics that these games are known for, because it shows off some really interesting level designs that are a whole lot of fun to explore, and the whole thing runs great on the deck, running at a solid 60 FPS, if not higher. I haven't really tried it unlocked, I don't think, but yeah, if you never played this back in the day, you owe it to yourself to give it a shot, especially if you're a fan of first-person shooters, or you're just curious about diving into some of the earliest entries in that genre. So yeah, Jared, thanks again for recommending this, I really appreciate it, and I'm positive I'm going to be spending a lot more time with this, the same way I'll probably be spending a lot more time with Dusk and Nightmare Reaper. And finally, going out on a much lighter note is OlliOlli World, which is a 2D skateboarding game that was recommended to me by Ken Masters. And the first thing I loved about this game was the art style, because it instantly feels like you're playing a Nickelodeon cartoon or something. And as somebody who grew up as a child of the 90s, I just absolutely love the look that they've got going on here for OlliOlli World. Although I will say that I naively thought that my years of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater experience would somehow translate into like an edge in this game and I would do pretty good out of the gate. I definitely did not. Because this candy-coated 2D skateboarding game can be just as tricky as the Tony Hawk games, but clearly it's a much more linear game working with 2 dimensions. But don't let the cutesy presentation fool you, because runs can get really difficult really quickly, and a lot of the stages require some perfect timing to traverse without bailing out, particularly if you're going for any of the optional challenges associated with each run. The controls are pretty straightforward and allow for a ton of flexibility, although I will say admittedly I did not like the feeling of ollieing and grinding with the left analog stick at first, but it did start to grow on me over time. And I think I'd really like to spend more time with this game, particularly because it has a really clear sense of progression. Plus, as a bonus, it does have a really cool Mario Bros. 3 style overworld, so you can hop from one challenge to the next, or if you need to revisit some earlier levels for some lower stakes practice runs. And I'm actually kind of kicking myself for not including this on a video with summer game recommendations, because aesthetically speaking, OlliOlli World is just begging to be like a go-to summer jam for some quick pick-up and play sessions. Now, I don't think a game like this would ever just like completely dethrone my love of Tony Hawk or something like that, but it was a refreshing take on an old favorite for me, so Ken, thank you you again for the recommendation, and it's been a blast playing it on the deck where it performs pretty much flawlessly. Alright, so that's it for this one. Really, I just wanted to highlight a few of the games that you had recommended to me, and obviously if you have any new recommendations for games I should be checking out, I definitely want to hear about it so I can, continue to have fun with my Steam Deck and maybe make more videos like this in the future. But as always, thanks for taking the time out of your day to watch these videos. I really appreciate it. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.